us is Thabiseng Moroge. And Thabiseng, I just wanted to quote her. She says, if you don't plan where your money is going, someone else is going to do it for you, either retailers, marketers, your children, your friends, or emergencies. So today, commit to create a plan. Thabiseng is an entrepreneur, speaker, and founder of Money Relations. She's an accredited facilitator, coach, and she's passionate about helping people to manage their day-to-day finances and to achieve their financial goals. And with me again, we have Themba. And Themba is a chartered accountant with more than 24 years of experience in corporate financial management and risk management. He also holds a master's in business administration and has been a consultant and trainer in the areas of risk management, asset and liability management, investment management for several corporates in 13 African countries. And over a period of 15 years, Themba has done presentations to blue collar and white collar management audiences. And as we have known before, Themba is an upcoming author of the book, Manage Your Personal Finances Like a Black Belt. And I would also want to quote Themba. Some of the quotes that we've heard from Themba is like investing is having an asset base that you want to grow over time, and you know it's intrinsic value. So I'll start with Themba. I'll just ask Themba. We'll start with debt before we go to financial freedom. Themba, what is good debt and what is bad debt?
Sorry, Chafi, it's been a chaotic day with Eskom load shedding. As we wait for Thabiseng, you've asked me the question, what is good debt and what is bad debt? Before I answer the question, I just want to explain to our audience why that question is very, very important, particularly in light of the competence framework that we have been following up to now. For some of us, who have been with me for this coaching journey, you would have known that we've been talking about a belt system. We started with white belt, we went on to the yellow belt, the orange belt, the green belt, and we're currently talking about financial independence on the blue belt. The reason why that question is very important is that as you progress from white belt to blue belt, the goal is to get rid of bad debt. And then as you move on from blue belt, brown belt, up to black belt, you will acquire debt, but that debt must be, good debt. The way I coach people, I explain to them that don't start borrowing until you have had some kind of financial education, because that is very, very important. The other thing that I explain to them is that it's almost impossible to get to financial freedom without doing some kind of borrowing, because borrowing enables you to have some kind of leverage in whatever you're doing, right? And one of the things that I will emphasize going forward to brown belt and black belt is that there is an established financial principle which basically says the cost of debt is cheaper than equity. But I don't want to get ahead of myself and begin to explain those difficult concepts until we've explained the elementary, stuff. So Tafi's question is, what is the difference between good debt and bad debt? Let me use 3 bullet points to define what bad debt, is. So the first bullet point to define what bad debt is that if you find yourself borrowing for the purposes of consumption, that is bad debt, right? So any borrowing where you are consuming, so borrowing to finance expensive, that's bad debt. So under borrowing for consumption, we are including things such as clothing accounts. I hate clothing accounts. I don't like clothing accounts. Anytime you are using your credit card to buy groceries, I don't like people who finance groceries using debt. That's bad debt. The second bullet point is that anytime you find yourself borrowing to finance an asset which is going down in value or a depreciating asset, that's bad debt. So the distinction between good debt and bad debt is that good debt is almost an investment. We borrow against an appreciating asset. The third bullet point to explain what bad debt is that bad debt is high interest loans. So every time you are paying a high interest on loans, that's bad debt. So I don't like people that borrow from machonistas, because that's bad debt, or borrowing from loan sharks. So what is bad debt? Bad debt is debt to finance consumption expenditure. Bad debt is debt to finance depreciating assets or assets that are losing value. Bad debt is debt that, where the cost of debt is very high, high interest loans, such as the borrowing from machonistas. What is good debt? Again, I've got 3 bullet points to explain what good debt is all about. I normally get the question which says, is debt good or bad? The answer to that question is that it depends on what kind of debt you are talking about, right? So we should be able to distinguish bad debt from good debt. One characteristic of good debt is that you are financing an asset which is appreciating. So an example of good debt is a mortgage, because in a mortgage, the asset is going up in value, and therefore that would qualify as good debt. The second characteristic of good debt is that if you've got interest-free debt, sometimes you've got people that give you interest-free debt or low-cost debt. That is good debt, because you can actually use that debt to acquire an asset that goes up in value. So remember what I said, the third bullet point under bad debt, high interest loans. So which means that the second bullet point under good debt is where we are talking about low-cost debt or subsidized debt. Another characteristic of good debt is that we're talking about debt that is within your risk appetite. One of the concepts that we will explain going forward is the concept of risk appetite. It's something that I started explaining at the yellow belt level when I introduced to you to a debt to disposable income ratio. Whenever you involve yourself in borrowing money, there is something that we call an appetite. And an appetite is nothing but your willingness to assume risk, the extent to which you are willing to assume risk. Never borrow money, never invest until you have articulated what your risk appetite is, because that's very, very important. That's why you see that when companies borrow money, when countries borrow money, they set limits, right? So when we're talking about a risk appetite, we are essentially talking about a calibrated limit, right? So even when you are involved in good debt, there must be a limit, which is the extent to which you are willing to borrow money, right? And that limit must be very, very clear to you. Obviously, as we go ahead in this coaching journey, we're going to explain more in terms of how to calibrate that limit. For some of you who are joining us now, we've had load shedding wherever we are, and therefore we had an interruption in the transmission. But we are glad that Thabiseng has just joined us now. So what I'll do is to hand over to Tafadzwa, and then Tafadzwa will introduce Thabiseng, and then after the introductions, we will then, just get the wisdom from Thabiseng. Maybe Tafadzwa, just to keep things going, I will just quickly, say some things that Thabiseng has said in my own words. So to some of you who didn't hear what Thabiseng said, earlier on, I got the impression that Thabiseng is very, very passionate about educating people on financial literacy. She did tell us, before we went live, that she's in the process of writing a book on financial literacy. She's an accredited facilitator, but not only is she an accredited facilitator, she is, also somebody who has founded an organization called, Money Relations, where she coaches individuals and small businesses on how to manage money, right? Very, very passionate. And when she coaches people on how to manage money, one of the things that she emphasizes quite a lot is how to manage, debts. So Thabiseng, I know you've done this before in an earlier broadcast, which Eskom has sabotaged. But if you could just, in a few, minutes, just explain what Money Relations is all about, and then Tafi can then take on from there.
Okay, thank you very much, Themba. Yes, so Money Relations is an organization, a business that, as you said, is passionate about financial literacy. And what we do is we coach individuals, we coach small groups as well on different aspects of financial management. So we teach people about budgeting, about investing, about saving. And through the coaching program, we help people, we hold their hands towards achieving their financial goals. And then we also, from time to time, have workshops. We either target grown-ups, parents, or we target children. We do have financial literacy training specifically for children. And I also do speaking engagements as well on financial literacy. So yeah, full scope of teaching and spreading the message of financial wellness.
Let me hijack the conversation. I know, Tafadzwa, you want to come in and progress things. I've been dying to ask this question from you, Thabiseng. Obviously, you're passionate about financial literacy. When do you think is the earliest that we should introduce the subject of finance and financial literacy, especially to young people? Because sometimes, this subject is introduced, later on in life, and people don't get. In your own view, when is the earliest that we should be talking about money and finances and what have you?
I say as early as 3. As early as 3, you don't have to go into detail of interest rates and compound interest, but money is such a prevalent part of our lives. It's something that exists in our lives on a day-to-day basis. So as a parent, you can just incorporate those conversations gently, into your conversation. So, if you have money in your wallet, just taking the money out, explaining what it is to your 3-year-old, 5-year-old child, and you just progress from there. So as early as possible, we have to teach children about financial literacy early as possible.
All right, that's very interesting. Over to you, Tafi.
Thank you very much, Thabiseng. We welcome you back.
Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, before we talk about financial freedom, maybe we can talk about debt freedom. What is credit score and how does one improve their score?
Okay, so credit score is basically an indicator of financial wellness. In our first take, I was explaining that it's very similar to an indicator of wellness, of health. One of the indicators of health would be your blood pressure, you would measure your blood pressure, and that would give you an indication of your health, particularly your blood pressure. So a credit score does something similar, but for your financial wellness, and it measures your credit worthiness. How likely are you to pay your debts on time? And this information is very important to lenders, to banks, third parties, lenders, cell phone providers, employers as well. Some employers are interested in understanding and knowing what your credit score is. The advantage of having a good credit score is the higher your credit score, the more you're able to negotiate with your banks. You can negotiate with the banks whether or not you pay a deposit. You can negotiate with your bank the kind of interest rates that you pay. If you find yourself in a difficult financial situation, having a good credit score does give you a lot more negotiating power. So yeah, so a credit score is basically an indicator of your credit worthiness. And then how do you go about improving it? Pay your debts on time every single month. If you're looking to fast track the improvement of your credit score, you want to pay more than the minimum amount that's required by your lenders. You also want to avoid shopping around for credit. So that basically means, excuse me, if you're looking to buy a vehicle or a home, for example, on a loan, don't shop around too much for a loan. Oh, excuse me, because that will flag your credit profile as if you're shopping for credit and you're desperate to rely on credit, and that has a negative impact on your credit score. To improve your credit score, just very quickly as well, you can also just manage your credit utilization, and that basically means if you have a credit limit of 1,000 Rand, what you want to do is to use as little of the credit limit that's been given to you as possible. So if your credit limit is 1,000 Rand, don't use the entire 1,000 Rand. Use as little of that 1,000 Rand as possible. And that also has a positive impact on your credit score.
Thank you very much, Ntabiseng, for the insightful nuggets there that try to pay more for your credits. Do not shop around for loans unless you are perceived as desperate. Oh, I thought one has to be diligent in looking maybe for favorable credits, but you're encouraging us not to do that, because then it shows that you're desperate, and it actually reduces your credit score. Themba, one question I always get from people: do I pay my debts first before I save, or I take, like, if I have debt, where do I find money to save?
All right, before I answer that question, I just want to pick up on the point that Thabiseng has made. And I learned this point the hard way. Thabiseng, we haven't told you about my background. At some point, we're talking about 10 years ago, I was drowning in debt. And because I was drowning in debt, I actually then had to come up with a plan of getting out of debt. So I made it a point that I would, get my credit score and sort of monitor the improvement in credit score almost on a monthly basis. And one of the things that I learned over the years is that any inquiry that any credit provider does on your credit status, it actually deducts points, off your credit score. And sometimes you would just go and apply for credit, and then you would have many inquiries, and with the number of inquiries that you have, it deducts from your credit score.
Absolutely.
And that I had to learn the hard way. But just to emphasize the point that you have actually made, I like your definition where you say the credit score is an indicator, and you equated it to health indicators. So what I got from that is that it's something that you should know and be very, very interested in. And in fact, some of these credit reports, in terms of legislation, you're entitled to one free credit report,
That's
every
correct.
year, without paying. Although for me, because I was passionate with getting out of debt, I actually had to pay, for a service with one of the, credit bureaus. But going back to your question, Taffy, that question is also very important. Because sometimes we've got people who are in debt, but they find themselves with an extra amount of money. And then the question then becomes, do I use that extra amount of money to pay off my debt or to invest in shares, for example? So I think it's a very, very, important, question. The short answer to that question, which is the way I look at things, is that if you've got an extra amount of money and you've got bad debt, like credit card, personal loans, use that extra money to pay off your debt very, very quickly. Very, very quickly, before you even start thinking of investing. Because the thing about investing, particularly investing in shares, sometimes shares can be volatile and you may or may not lose money. But my advice is that pay off your debts, very, very quickly. The other thing that I would want to say in response to your question, which is a common question that we get, as well. Sometimes we've got somebody who's got a good debt, like a mortgage. And then the question then, as we know, in South Africa, a mortgage is a loan that you pay off, contractually over 20 years. And then the question then becomes, do I use my extra money to pay off my mortgage very quickly, or do I start investing at that stage? We have done computations that would actually prove that sometimes you're actually better off paying off your mortgage, very, very quickly. And until you have gotten to a stage where you've got, manageable good debt, you have eliminated all your bad debts, then you can start thinking about investing, because by definition, investing is, for the long term. So I know you'll be asking, Thabiseng another question, but maybe, Tafadzo, before you ask Thabiseng the next question, I'm interested in Thabiseng's, stake on that particular, question. Do I start, investing while I have got debt?
I agree with your approach, Themba. I agree 100% with your approach. I think that what is also important is that while you're paying off your debt, you don't accumulate more debt.
Yeah.
And that's the mistake that a lot of people often make. They tell themselves that I'm paying off this debt, and when I'm done, or I'm working towards paying off this debt, and when I'm done, only then will I start investing. But then you end up being on the cycle of paying off debt, and you never reach a point where you're able to save and invest money. So I do agree with you. That it is better to focus on the debt. Another reason is that debt eats into your net worth.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you could be building your net worth by investing and buying assets. But if you're still consuming debt, that debt is eating into your net worth. So you're actually not moving forward. So I do agree with you. It's better to focus on your debt, pay that off, and then focus on investing and saving. Sorry, I just have to add. Sorry, let me just add something that, of course, there will be instances where you are saving for something specific. Maybe you're saving for a wedding, you're saving for something specific. Then, of course, you can pay off your debt while you are saving for this specific item or event.
Thank you very much, Thabiseng. Before I ask your question, we have a question here from Nonhlanhla. She's saying, if you have judgments against you, how can you start working on your credit score to be positive?
Thabiseng, maybe you'd want to take that first, then I will go second.
So the first thing you want to do is to stop all credit activity. Stop any credit activity that you might have. So if you have store cards, if you have credit cards, stop using those items and stop using those credit lines. And then secondly, you want to find out from the credit provider that has issued a judgment against you and find out the details of that judgment. Are the details even accurate? Because there are instances where a judgment is issued against your name and it's not even accurate. So reach out to the credit provider or to the individual that has issued a judgment against you and engage with them and find out exactly what the details of that judgment is. And then work towards paying it off. Work towards paying off that judgment, because it will not get wiped off. Well, at least in the short term, it won't get wiped off in the short term. So yeah, so pay it off. Contact your credit provider and pay it off. Themba?
Totally agree with that. The only thing that I would want to add, to that is that, some of our audience, Thabiseng, are very much in debt. So sometimes we talk about investing, saving, but we're talking about people that are over borrowed and so much in debt. And so I totally agree with what you are saying. I've got a 3-step plan, which I followed when I was getting out of debt. So the first principle that I applied, which is exactly what you have said, if you are in a hole, stop digging further, all right? Because the mistake that people make is that you're already in a hole and then you continue digging, right? And then you are trapping yourself in a debt, spiral. So the first point which we have highlighted is stop all credit activity, right? Because that's very, very important. The second point would be, and this is always a point that I make to my clients as well. Have you ever seen, Thabiseng, people who don't answer calls from their creditors? Because they've run out of excuses of why they have not paid in a long time. So what I say to people is that take the call from creditors, right? Play open cards with all your creditors. At least get to a point where you know how much you owe the world. There are certain people who have been borrowing money to such an extent that they've lost count in terms of how much they owe the world. So stop digging, stop all credit activity. But secondly, take stock of how much debt you actually owe the world and sort of categorize it into high interest debt, low interest debt, because the idea is to get rid of the high interest debt, first, as you have extra cash. There is a secret that I don't tell people, but I'll tell it here on this show because I want to help people, Thabiseng. There was a time when I was in debt, and you're talking about judgment, and you have made a very important point, which basically says negotiate with your creditors. So 2 points that I would want to highlight there. The first thing is that when I decided to play open cards with my creditors, some of them actually gave me discounts to settle the debt. I remember one particular, creditor, they actually gave me 70% discount.
Wow.
And they said, look, if you pay this and you do a once-off settlement, we've got a special offer in a particular month and you'll be entitled to 70% discount. And I took advantage of that offer, with 2 creditors. And I was able to, and when I got to hear that some of these creditors offered discount, guess what? I stopped this thing of paying on a monthly basis to creditors. I would then sort of accumulate a sum of money, and then I would approach a particular creditor and say, look, I've got a sum of money. What discount are you going to offer me
to
pay
strategy.
off a particular debt? And that's how I got out of debt. I had debt of something like 2 million, at some stage. And that's been, the source of our passion, myself and Taffy. And if you are interested to know how that debt was accumulated, Thabiseng, we had 2 repossessed properties and, default judgments, against it. But now, guess how much I owe the world? Zero. Yeah.
Yes. Fantastic.
So it's
Fantastic.
very possible. Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah.
That's very inspiring, Themba. Very inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ntabiseng and Themba. We also got another question before I ask the questions that we already have. Tendai Elliot is asking, what happens if a debt is erroneous and you are quite certain that the amount owing is not legitimate? What can you do to ensure that you don't get wrongly blacklisted? Maybe I'll start with you, Ntabiseng.
I think it goes back to what Themba was saying, and I also alluded to earlier on. Communicate, play open cards. Just to reinforce also what Themba said, creditors like to be paid, and they like to be contacted. If you keep quiet, they assume that you are running away from them, and that's their opportunity to then take legal action against you. So approach your creditors, play open cards, and ask them. Tell them that I've received a statement, and I believe that it has an error. Please show me how this interest was calculated, or please show me how this balance was calculated. Sit down with them, and present your case. If you've made payments, take those proof of payments with you when you visit your creditor, or even if it's telephonic or via email, have that proof on your end so that you can prove your case to the creditor.
Just to add on to what Ntabiseng has said, Tafadzo, before you come in, I want to mention two things from experience. So the first thing that I want to mention is that most consumers, particularly in South Africa, they know how to borrow money, but they don't know about the cost of credit and some of the entries that go into their loan account. They never really scrutinize that loan account or scrutinize statements that come from creditors. As part of the coaching journey that we are embarking on, we encourage everyone on a monthly basis to actually know what is the cost of the credit. Another thing that I have gotten to understand, I used to work in a bank, Ntabiseng, and I've gotten to understand that even banks make mistakes. Sometimes they overcharge people. They overcharge people. And because consumers are not following what's happening on their statements, they get overcharged. So it's very important that we are financially literate, and part of financial literacy is knowing the cost of that debt, how much you are being charged, but also, interrogating the entries that are being made against you. Let me just add something very interesting, which I got to understand when I used to work for Absa. And that's the question of identity fraud, where people can actually steal your identity and sometimes borrow even in your name when you are not even aware, of it. That's why at some stage I made a commitment to myself to say, any entry that happens on my credit report, the credit bureau actually lets me know about it. So there won't be any debt that is accumulated in my name, which I am not aware of. So on a monthly basis, I almost scrutinize all the debts. I interrogate the entries, and to the extent possible, I even negotiate, with creditors. Well, that was when I didn't have debt. Now I found myself with no debt. So it's an interesting scenario. I don't have any creditors anymore. But we have got to be very aggressive, about it, and be first on the phone to call our creditors if we are not in agreement, because there have been a lot of instances where there's been identity fraud or even wrong entries, which are made in your name.
Thank you very much, Themba, for that information, that you may actually end up paying debt that does not belong to you because of wrong identity and wrong entry. Yes, I will come back to Ntabiseng, your question. Can you give us practical steps from your experience, how one can get out of debt?
I think Themba has already answered a big part of this question, but what I can add is an alternative method of getting out of debt, which is known as the snowball method. So Themba spoke about focusing on or strategizing around the interest or the debt with the highest interest rates. But the other alternative is to look at what is called a snowball method, where you are focusing on the smallest value of debt. And once you've paid that smallest debt off, whatever installment you were using to pay that installment or that debt, you then use those funds and you tackle the next smallest one. And so you move through your debt from smallest to biggest, using the funds from the previous installment and adding to each one of your debts until all your debt is has been eliminated. What I really, really like about this method is that it gives you an opportunity to, you know that expression of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that's what I love about the snowball method, because it gives you an opportunity to tackle one small debt. And it also gives you a sense of achievement, because you've paid off one debt. Now you can move on to the next smallest one. And so you move through your debt in that manner. But apart from that one, Themba has covered the other methods.
Before you come in, Tefi, I actually like the snowball method. I think now that you're talking about it in Thabiseng, I can remember how I got out of debt and the feeling that I got when you've got a small debt, such as, I used to have small debts, such as even a Telkom account. There was a time when, Telkom, I used to have a Telkom account, which I disconnected, and then there was a problem with it, and then it was reflecting on my credit. But I will never forget the feeling I had one day when that debt was paid off. It was a small amount, but the thing about a snowball, it's so rewarding, because then you've got this feeling which says, I can actually do it, right? Because you're working through a list. It's a small amount, but once you have paid it off, you almost celebrate your, debt freedom journey and the milestones that you are having, over time. So I really liked it, and to some extent, it's something that I applied, and it gives you momentum. I think the thing about the snowball method, as you have defined it, now that you have defined it, I think to me, the advantage of that is the momentum that you gain, as you are celebrating these small, these milestones, no matter how small the steps may be, but at the end of the day, it's an incredible milestone towards debt freedom.
Thank you very much, Themba, for that. We also got another question from Tendai. I'll start with you, and Thabiseng. Is the credit bureau international? Can I be affected by a mortgage debt incurred in Botswana? I believe Tendai is in South Africa.
So how the credit bureaus work, there are credit bureaus that are specifically situated in certain countries. So in South Africa, we have Experian, we have TransUnion, and a couple of others. And each country would have their own credit bureaus. However, there are also internationally based credit bureaus that cover different countries. So to answer his question, they are both. So they are both. And if you are perhaps looking for credit, and the credit provider, it depends what the credit provider, which credit bureau the credit provider is using. If the credit provider uses a local credit bureau, then you have nothing to worry about. Your activities in a foreign country will not be shown. However, if they use an international credit provider or credit bureau, then your activity from another country would appear.
Thank you very much.
Just to add on to what Thabiseng has said, normally the credit bureau will pick you with an ID number. That's how they identify it. So let's distinguish between individuals and sometimes corporates and small businesses that tend to borrow, internationally. So as Thabiseng has highlighted, there are international credit bureaus. There are local ones. Sometimes, and in almost all the cases, when we're talking about personal finances, the credit bureau tends to be localized, because the way that they work is they normally work with an ID number, and ID numbers are not necessarily international, right? So that's the thing that I would want to say there.
Thank you very much for that, Themba and Thabiseng. Thabiseng, on financial independence, what is the difference between saving and investing? And maybe if you can add some practical examples.
Okay, so the difference between saving and investing is that saving is basically putting money away. So you're taking money, saving could even be you taking money, you're putting it under your mattress. That is saving. You're not accumulating any interest. You're not beating inflation. You're just taking this money and putting it away somewhere. You could be putting it away for something something specific, a wedding, an event, children's school fees, etc. An investment, when you're investing money, your intention is, number one, to beat inflation. So in other words, you are hoping to make a return from that investment. You're hoping to make money from that investment. And secondly, you're also investing to make some kind of passive income from that investment. So they are very different. But I often say that saving is the gateway into investing. If you want to invest, if you want to start investing, I encourage my clients to start saving, start getting into the habit of saving, start getting into the habit of not using your entire salary or your entire income. Once you get into that habit of saving, then you can sort of graduate into the world of investing.
Thank you, Thabiseng, for that. Saving is a gateway to investment. Themba, would you have anything to add to that?
Oh, totally agree with what Thabiseng, has said. Obviously, she appears like she has been on this journey and coaching people, on this journey. So totally agree, with that. The way I also look at it is that, normally when you're talking about saving, you're talking about short-term financial goals. I want, to save for a wedding. I'll be wedding very soon. So whenever you're talking about short-term financial goals, investing tends to be long-term in nature. So the way I look at investment, in fact, my own definition of investment is that unless you're willing to put money for at least 5 years to work for you, then you are actually investing. So we're talking about long-term goals, here. Another distinction that I have between saving and investing is normally when you are saving, it's normally for liquidity purposes. It's low risk, right? As Thabiseng has said, with investing, you want to beat inflation, and therefore there is some risk, involved, there. We would follow the same approach that Thabiseng has. So we advise people to build an emergency account first, and then once you've got an emergency account, you can then start thinking about, investing, so that you are always, liquid, to some extent. Just to add on to what you have been asking, Tafadzwa, one of the questions that I normally get from people is that I have got money in the bank account, I am investing. People tend to use the word investing for money that they have in a bank account. That's not investing. When you've got money that you are saving in a bank account, that's saving, because you are unlikely to beat inflation by keeping money in a bank account.
Thank you very much for a very insightful session. Before we finish, just last question for Thabiseng. Was someone who asked, they were running a creche before COVID, and they closed. So apparently the place that they were using is closed, and the parents are taking their children from to other places, and she doesn't have money, but she wants to revive the creche, maybe in 1 or 2 minutes before we close.
Okay, thanks for that, Tafadzwa. I would say that it's more motivation than really advice. So my words to this individual is to remember where they were. So once upon a time, they had a creche that they were running, and before COVID, it was successful. They can achieve that again. The steps to achieve that might not be the identical steps that they previously took. And this person needs to be perhaps a little bit more open to taking a slightly different direction. So what comes to mind, I'll give you a practical example. What comes to my mind is perhaps the individual could start small, work at another creche and build from there, you know, work at another creche, maybe learn something new from a different creche and build from there. Start putting away money, start saving from whatever income they'll be making, start saving so that they can eventually restart their creche again. It could also mean that this individual might have to, I don't know, I'm trying to move away from them getting a loan in order to start the creche. But there are certain things they could reach out to the network that they previously had. Start small, maybe start with 3 children instead of the 20 children as an example that they had previously. So my encouragement to them is just for them to open their mind, reach out to the networks that they already have, and start small and start building from there.
Thank you very much for everyone who participated, and we appreciate you, Thabiseng. For those who would want to get a hold of Thabiseng, she has a Facebook page with the name Thabiseng, N-T-A-B-I-S-E-N-G, Thabiseng Monoge, M-O-N-O-G-E. She has Instagram, Money Relations. Then she also got an email, money_relations, and she also got an email, info@moneyrelations.co.za. So if you want to get hold of her, and she's a coach, or if you want someone to do some presentations, you can get hold of her on that. If you also want to get hold of Themba, you can visit his website, www.duplexinstitute.com, or you can check his YouTube account, Manage Your Personal Finances Like a Black Belt. And you can also check our website, www.tafazomazibukospeaks.co.za, or you can write me an email to tafazomazibukospeaks.co.za. Thank you very much for participating. We wish you all enjoy the rest of the weekend. Cheers.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much, Thabiseng. It was nice meeting you.
Likewise. Thank you so much to both of you. It was wonderful.